The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the corporate boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. Camilla Martinez adjusted her blazer nervously as she walked into the meeting room, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She had been dreading this day for weeks, but there was no turning back now. For the past 3 years, Camilla had been the star employee at Henderson Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in downtown Chicago. Her colleagues admired her seemingly perfect track record, her ability to land major clients, and her confident presentations that always impressed the senior partners. What they didn't know was that beneath her polished exterior lay a web of lies that was about to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. She claimed to have graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School when she had actually received her degree from a local community college. He had spent years building his reputation on thoroughness and integrity, values that had served him well in both his professional and personal life. William first noticed something was off during a staff meeting 6 months earlier. Camilla had mentioned working on a project for a tech startup in Silicon Valley, describing in vivid detail her collaboration with the company's CEO. However, William happened to know the CEO personally from his college days, and when he casually mentioned Camilla's work during a phone call, his friend had no idea who she was. That small inconsistency planted a seed of doubt in William's mind. He reached out to his network of contacts, cross-referencing the clients and projects Camilla claimed to have worked on. What he discovered was troubling, but not entirely surprising. Many of the companies she mentioned had never heard of her, and several of the glowing testimonials she had presented during performance reviews appear to be fabricated. The breaking point came when Camilla claimed to have secured a potential partnership with Morrison Industries, a major manufacturing company that William's firm had been trying to work with for years. That evening, William sat in his home office, staring at the letter of intent that Camilla had proudly distributed to the entire management team. The letterhead looked authentic. The signature appeared genuine, but William knew it was all an elaborate fake. He felt a mix of disappointment and anger, not just at Camilla's deception, but at how her lies had potentially damaged the firm's reputation and wasted everyone's time and resources. The next morning, William requested a private meeting with the firm's managing partner, Robert Henderson, the company's founder and Camilla's biggest supporter. The conversation was difficult, as Henderson initially refused to believe that his star employee could be capable of such extensive deception. He methodically presented his findings, showing Henderson the inconsistencies he had discovered, the testimonials from clients who claimed to have never worked with Camilla, and, most damning of all, his conversation with the Morrison Industries CEO. By the end of their meeting, Henderson's face had turned pale, and he agreed that they needed to confront Camilla directly. They decided to handle the situation during the monthly all-staff meeting, where Camilla was scheduled to present her latest client acquisition to the entire team. It would be the perfect opportunity to address her claims publicly and get to the truth once and for all. Camilla spent the weekend preparing for what she believed would be another triumphant presentation. She had no idea that William and Henderson had spent those same days gathering evidence and planning their approach. She practiced her talking points about the Morrison Industries partnership, refining the details of her fabricated success story and preparing to bask in the admiration of her colleagues. On Monday morning, as Camilla walked into that boardroom, she was still living in her carefully constructed fantasy world. She greeted her colleagues warmly, exchanged pleasantries about their weekends, and confidently set up her presentation materials. The room filled with the familiar faces of people who had come to respect and admire her apparent abilities. William took his usual seat near the back of the room, his expression neutral but his heart racing slightly. He had always prided himself on maintaining his composure in difficult situations, but today felt different. There was something almost surreal about watching Camilla prepare to present what they all knew would be her downfall. The other attendees chatted among themselves, unaware that they were about to witness one of the most dramatic moments in the firm's 20-year history. Sarah from accounting complimented Camilla on her new shoes. Marcus from business development asked about her weekend plans. Jennifer from Human Resources mentioned how excited everyone was to hear about the Morrison Industries deal. Camilla basked in the attention, her confidence growing with each positive interaction. She had become so comfortable with her deceptions that she genuinely seemed to believe some of them herself. In her mind, she wasn't really lying anymore. She was simply sharing her version of reality, a version where she was the successful, accomplished professional she had always wanted to be. As the meeting was called to order, Henderson stood at the head of the conference table, his expression more serious than usual. He began with the standard agenda items, discussing quarterly reports and upcoming deadlines, but there was a tension in the room that several of the more perceptive employees began to notice. Camilla remained focused on her upcoming presentation, reviewing her notes one final time and mentally rehearsing her opening remarks about the Morrison Industries partnership. She had no idea that across the room, William was quietly reviewing his own set of notes, preparing for a confrontation that would expose 3 years of carefully constructed lies. The stage was set for what would become legendary office folklore, a moment that would be discussed and analyzed by employees for years to come. In just a few minutes, Camilla's world would come crashing down in front of everyone she had worked so hard to impress, and William would find himself in the unexpected position of watching it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and genuine surprise at how dramatically the truth could emerge. As Henderson called for Camilla to begin her presentation, the room fell silent, and everyone's attention turned toward the woman who had no idea she was about to experience the most humiliating moment of her professional career. The morning sun continued to stream through those tall windows, but for Camilla, the light was about to reveal shadows she had spent years trying to hide. Camilla stood confidently at the front of the room, her laptop connected to the large display screen behind her. She clicked to her first slide, which featured the Morrison Industries logo alongside Henderson and Associates branding, with a bold headline, Strategic Partnership Announcement, emblazoned across the top. "Good morning, everyone," Camilla began, her voice carrying the same self-assured tone that had become her trademark during presentations. "I'm excited to share some incredible news that I believe will transform our firm's trajectory for the next several years." The room was attentive, with several colleagues leaning forward in anticipation. Camilla had built such a reputation for landing major deals that her presentations had become must-attend events. Even the administrative staff had found excuses to linger near the conference room, hoping to catch glimpses of whatever success story she was about to unveil. "As many of you know, Morrison Industries has been on our target client list for almost 4 years," Camilla continued, advancing to a slide that showed impressive financial projections. "Well, I'm pleased to announce that after months of relationship building and strategic positioning, they've agreed to partner with us on a comprehensive business transformation initiative." Murmurs of excitement rippled through the room. Morrison Industries was exactly the kind of blue-chip client that could elevate the firm's profile and provide stable revenue for years to come. Several junior associates exchanged impressed glances, once again marveling at Camilla's apparent ability to succeed where others had failed. William remained silent in his corner, observing Camilla's confident demeanor and noting how naturally the lies flowed from her lips. There was something almost admirable about her complete commitment to the deception, the way she seemed to inhabit her fictional reality so thoroughly that even she appeared convinced by her own story. "The initial contract value is $2.3 million, Camilla announced, pausing for effect as appreciative whistles and applause filled the room. "But, more importantly, this partnership positions us as Morrison's preferred consulting partner, which could lead to additional projects worth upwards of $10 million over the next 3 years." Henderson, who was sitting at the head of the table, watched the presentation with a carefully controlled expression. He had agreed to let Camilla finish her entire presentation before addressing the inconsistencies William had discovered. Part of him still hoped that somehow there had been a misunderstanding, that Camilla's claims would prove legitimate despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. Camilla clicked to her next slide, which displayed what appeared to be an email thread between herself and Morrison's executive team. The correspondence looked professional and detailed, discussing timeline expectations, project scope, and preliminary budget allocations. To anyone who didn't know better, it appeared to be concrete evidence of a genuine business relationship. As you can see from this communication with their leadership team, Camilla explained, gesturing toward the screen, they're particularly interested in our expertise in digital transformation and operational efficiency. CEO James Morrison specifically mentioned that our firm came highly recommended through his network of industry contacts. William shifted slightly in his seat, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The irony wasn't lost on him that James Morrison had indeed mentioned Henderson and Associates during their recent golf game, but only to express frustration about the lack of meaningful consulting options in their market segment. The presentation continued for another 15 minutes, with Camilla providing increasingly elaborate details about the supposed partnership. She described conference calls that had never happened, meetings that existed only in her imagination, and collaborative planning sessions that would have been impressive if they had actually occurred. Her colleagues hung on every word, taking notes and already beginning to plan how they might contribute to this exciting new project. In conclusion, Camilla said as she reached her final slide, "This partnership represents everything we've been working toward as a firm. It validates our strategic approach, showcases our capabilities to the broader market, and provide a foundation for sustainable growth that will benefit everyone in this room." The applause was enthusiastic and genuine, with several colleagues standing to congratulate Camilla on what they believed was a remarkable achievement. Sarah from accounting was already calculating how the revenue would impact their quarterly bonuses. Marcus from business development was mentally drafting press releases to announce the partnership. Jennifer from human resources was wondering if they would need to hire additional staff to handle the increased workload. Camilla basked in the admiration, her smile radiant as she accepted handshakes and compliments from around the room. For a brief moment, she seemed to forget that none of it was real, allowing herself to experience the genuine pride and satisfaction that should have accompanied such a significant business win. "That was absolutely incredible, Camilla," said David, one of the senior consultants. "How did you manage to get through to them when we've been trying for so long?" "It really came down to persistence and finding the right angle," Camilla replied smoothly. "I spent a lot of time researching their specific challenges and positioning our solutions in a way that directly addressed their pain points. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time with the right message." William watched this exchange with growing fascination. Camilla's answer was actually quite insightful and demonstrated genuine understanding of effective sales strategies. It made her deception all the more puzzling, as she clearly possessed the skills and knowledge necessary to succeed legitimately. As the congratulations continued, Henderson slowly stood from his seat at the head of the table. The room gradually quieted, sensing that their managing partner had something to add to the discussion. "Thank you for that presentation, Camilla," Henderson began, his tone measured and professional. "Before we adjourn, I'd like to ask you a few follow-up questions about the Morrison Industries partnership." Camilla nodded confidently, still riding the high of her colleagues' enthusiasm. "Of course, Robert. What would you like to know?" "Well, I'm curious about the timeline," Henderson said, consulting a notepad in front of him. "When exactly did you first make contact with James Morrison?" "It was about 6 months ago," Camilla answered without hesitation. "I reached out through LinkedIn initially, then followed up with a more formal introduction letter. We had our first phone conversation in early March." Henderson nodded thoughtfully. "And when did you meet with him in person?" "We had lunch at the university club about 3 months ago," Camilla replied, her confidence unwavering. "He's actually quite charming, very focused on long-term strategic thinking. We discussed his vision for Morrison Industries and how our firm could help him achieve those goals." William found himself genuinely impressed by the level of detail in Camilla's responses. She wasn't just making things up on the spot. She had clearly spent considerable time developing and refining her fictional narrative. The specificity of her answers suggested a level of preparation that went far beyond simple opportunistic lying. "That's interesting," Henderson continued, his voice still neutral. "Can you tell me more about that lunch meeting? What did you discuss specifically?" Camilla launched into an elaborate description of her supposed meeting with James Morrison, including details about the restaurant's atmosphere, their conversation topics, and Morrison's specific concerns about his company's operational efficiency. She spoke with such conviction and vivid detail that several people in a room found themselves completely absorbed in her story. He mentioned that he's been looking for a consulting partner who can think beyond traditional approaches, Camilla explained. He was particularly interested in our track record with digital transformation projects, especially the work we did with Brennan Manufacturing last year. This reference caught William's attention immediately. The Brennan Manufacturing project had been one of his own successes, not Camilla's. She was now appropriating his work history to support her fabricated story about Morrison Industries. The audacity of it was almost breathtaking. Henderson continued his questioning, asking for increasingly specific details about the partnership agreement, the project timeline, and the key stakeholders involved. With each answer, Camilla dug herself deeper into her web of deception, providing elaborate explanations for things that had never happened and people she had never met. The room remained attentive, but began to sense that something unusual was happening. Henderson's line of questioning seemed more thorough than typical post-presentation discussions, and there was an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been present during the initial congratulations. "One final question, Camilla," Henderson said, his tone shifting slightly. "You mentioned that James Morrison specifically requested to work with our firm based on recommendations from his network. Can you tell me who provided those recommendations?" Camilla paused for the first time during the questioning, a brief flicker of uncertainty crossing her face before she recovered her composure. "He mentioned several contacts, but I believe the primary referral came from someone at Meridian Consulting. They had worked with Morrison Industries on a smaller project last year and suggested that we would be a good fit for this larger initiative." William couldn't help but admire her quick thinking. Meridian Consulting was a legitimate firm that had indeed worked with Morrison Industries, making her answer seem plausible to anyone who wasn't intimately familiar with the details of that relationship. "I see," Henderson said, making a note on his pad. "Well, thank you for the detailed information. This certainly sounds like an exciting opportunity for our firm." The room began to stir as people assumed the meeting was concluding, but Henderson remained standing, his expression growing more serious. The moment everyone had been unknowingly anticipating was finally about to arrive, and William found himself leaning forward slightly, curious to see exactly how the truth would emerge and how Camilla would react when her carefully constructed world came crashing down around her. "Actually, Camilla, before we adjourn," Henderson continued, his voice taking on a more formal tone that immediately caught everyone's attention, "I need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding the Morrison Industries partnership." The atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The celebratory mood evaporated as colleagues exchanged puzzled glances, unsure what concerns could possibly exist regarding such an apparently successful deal. Camilla's confident smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Concerns?" she asked, her voice still steady, but with a barely perceptible edge. "What kind of concerns?" Henderson gestured toward William, who had remained quietly in his corner throughout the presentation. "William has been conducting some due diligence on our recent client acquisitions, and he's discovered some discrepancies that we need to clarify." All eyes turned to William as he stood slowly, his expression serious but not unkind. He had been dreading this moment almost as much as anticipating it. There was no satisfaction in exposing someone's professional downfall, regardless of how necessary it might be for the firm's integrity. "Camilla," William began, his voice calm and measured, "I spoke with James Morrison yesterday afternoon. He's a personal friend of mine from college, and when I mentioned your presentation today, he seemed quite confused." The color began to drain from Camilla's face, but she fought to maintain her composure. "Confused about what?" "Maybe there was some miscommunication about which specific projects we discussed." William reached into his briefcase and pulled out his phone, scrolling to a text message thread. "Actually, he was confused because Morrison Industries has never had any contact with our firm. In fact, he specifically told me that they're not currently working with any outside consultants and have no plans to do so for the remainder of this fiscal year." The silence in the room was deafening. Several colleagues looked back and forth between William and Camilla, trying to process what they were hearing. The elaborate presentation they had just witnessed, complete with detailed financial projections and communication records, was apparently based on completely fabricated information. Camilla's mind raced as she searched for an explanation that might salvage the situation. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice beginning to waver slightly. "Perhaps he forgot about our initial conversations, or maybe there's been some internal miscommunication at Morrison Industries about their consulting needs." William shook his head gently. "I'm afraid it's more complicated than that, Camilla. After my conversation with James, I decided to verify some of the other clients and projects you've mentioned over the past few months." He pulled out a folder containing printed emails and notes from his investigation. "The Brennan manufacturing project you referenced earlier? That was actually my project, not yours. The testimonial letters from Pacific Rim Industries that you included in your performance review? Pacific Rim's CEO confirmed that they've never worked with anyone from our firm." The room was now completely silent except for the sound of shuffling papers as William organized his evidence. Camilla stood frozen at the front of the room, her confident presentation demeanor crumbling as the scope of William's investigation became clear. "The Harvard MBA degree you mentioned during your interview?" William continued, his voice remaining professional despite the devastating nature of his revelations. "Harvard has no record of you in their business school program from any of the years you claim to have attended." Jennifer from Human Resources gasped audibly, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The Harvard MBA had been one of the primary qualifications that had impressed them during Camilla's hiring process 3 years earlier. If that was fabricated, it called into question everything they thought they knew about her background. Henderson stepped forward, his expression grave. "Camilla, these are extremely serious allegations. Do you have any explanation for these discrepancies?" Camilla's composure finally began to crack visibly. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the presentation podium, and her breathing became more rapid. The weight of 3 years of lies was beginning to crash down on her simultaneously, and she could feel the stares of her colleagues burning into her. There must be some kind of misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice lacking any of its previous confidence. "Maybe the records got mixed up somehow, or perhaps there's been some confusion about the specific details of these projects." William continued methodically through his findings, each revelation more damaging than the last. The client she claimed to have secured, the project she said she had led, the educational credentials that had gotten her hired in the first place. All of it was systematically debunked with phone calls, email confirmations, and official records. Marcus from Business Development finally spoke up, his voice filled with confusion and growing anger. "Camilla, are you saying that all of those success stories you shared during our team meetings were fabricated?" The direct question hung in the air like a challenge. Camilla looked around the room at the faces of colleagues who had respected and admired her, people who had celebrated her apparent achievements and learned from her supposed expertise. The guilt and shame were overwhelming, but she still couldn't bring herself to admit the full scope of her deception. "It's not that simple," she said weakly. "The projects were real, the results were real. Maybe some of the details got confused over time." William felt an unexpected surge of pity for Camilla as he watched her struggle to maintain even a shred of dignity in an impossible situation. Despite his anger at her deception, he could see that she was genuinely talented and had probably convinced herself that the lies were necessary to succeed in their competitive industry. "Camilla," Williams said gently, "the email thread you just showed us from Morrison Industries. Can you explain how you created that correspondence?" This question struck at the heart of her most recent and elaborate deception. The emails she had displayed during her presentation were sophisticated fabrications that would have required considerable time and technical skill to create. Their professional appearance and detailed content suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment lie, but rather a carefully planned deception. Camilla's shoulders sagged as she realized there was no credible explanation she could provide. The evidence was overwhelming, The inconsistencies were too numerous to explain away, and her colleagues were beginning to understand the full scope of what had been happening. "I created them," she whispered, barely loud enough for the room to hear. "The emails, the testimonials, the project reports. I created all of it." The admission sent shockwaves through the room. Several people stood up from their chairs in disbelief, while others sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of what they had just heard. 3 years of professional relationships and mutual respect had been built on an elaborate foundation of lies. Sarah from accounting was the first to speak, her voice filled with hurt and confusion. "But Camilla, why? You're genuinely good at this job. Why did you feel like you needed to make things up?" It was a question that Camilla herself had been avoiding for years. In the beginning, the lies had seemed like small embellishments designed to give her an edge in a competitive environment. But each success built on deception had required additional lies to maintain, creating an ever-expanding web of fabrication that had eventually consumed her entire professional identity. "I don't know," she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "It started small, just little exaggerations to help me fit in and seem more qualified. But once I started, I couldn't figure out how to stop without destroying everything I had built." William found himself in the unexpected position of feeling genuinely sorry for Camilla despite everything she had done. Her admission revealed a person who had become trapped by her own deceptions, unable to escape the fictional persona she had created without facing the consequences she was now confronting anyway. Henderson cleared his throat, bringing the room's attention back to the immediate practical implications of these revelations. "Camilla, I think you understand that this situation requires immediate action. We'll need to conduct a full review of all your projects and client relationships to determine the extent of any potential damage to the firm's reputation." As the reality of her situation became clear, something unexpected happened. Despite the devastating nature of the moment and the professional humiliation she was experiencing, William found himself fighting back a smile. Not out of cruelty or satisfaction at her downfall, but out of genuine amazement at the sheer audacity and creativity of what Camilla had managed to accomplish. The scope of her deception was so elaborate, so meticulously planned and executed, that it demonstrated a level of intelligence and dedication that could have made her incredibly successful if channeled in legitimate directions. The irony was almost comical. She had worked harder to create fake success than most people work to achieve real success. As William watched Camilla gather her materials with shaking hands while her colleagues continued to stare in disbelief, he couldn't help but appreciate the dramatic inclusion to a mystery he had been investigating for months. The truth had emerged exactly as he had anticipated, but the impact was even more spectacular than he had imagined. The room remained silent as Camilla walked toward the door, her 3 years at Henderson and Associates ending in the most public and humiliating way possible. As she reached the exit, she turned back one final time to look at the colleagues who had witnessed her complete professional destruction. William caught her eye and, despite everything that had happened, gave her a small nod that somehow conveyed both disappointment in her choices and respect for her obvious intelligence. It was a moment of human connection in the midst of professional catastrophe, a recognition that even the most elaborate deceptions ultimately spring from very human fears and insecurities. As the door closed behind Camilla, the room erupted in stunned conversation, with everyone trying to process what they had just witnessed. William sat back down quietly, reflecting on how the pursuit of truth had led to such a dramatic conclusion and wondering what lessons everyone involved might learn from this extraordinary morning that none of them would ever forget.